I'm Jessica Wilson, 28, and I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would vanish from my family's life. But when my father called demanding I pay off my younger sister's $45,000 debt, something inside me finally broke. After years of being the responsible one, the reliable daughter, the family ATM, I made a decision that shocked even myself. I packed my bags and disappeared without a trace. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from, hit subscribe, and stay with me, because sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Growing up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, our family looked picture perfect from the outside. My father Richard worked as a bank manager, my mother Karen taught third grade at the local elementary school, and we lived in a comfortable 4-bedroom house in a good neighborhood with decent schools. But behind our white picket fence and Sunday family dinners, there was a pattern I couldn't see until I was much older. My sister Amber came along when I was 3, and from the beginning, she was the family princess. While my parents weren't wealthy, they made sure Amber always had the latest toys, the cutest clothes, and the most expensive birthday parties. "Your sister is more sensitive," my mother would say whenever I questioned the disparity. "She needs more support." Meanwhile, I was expected to be the responsible one, a role assigned to me before I could even understand what it meant. When I was 8, Amber broke my mother's favorite vase while running through the house despite repeated warnings. When our parents came home, she cried and said I had pushed her. Despite my protests, I lost TV privileges for a week and had to use my birthday money to replace the vase. It was the first of many times I would be punished for Amber's mistakes. By middle school, the pattern was firmly established. If Amber struggled in a class, my parents hired tutors. When I needed help, my father would say, "You're smart, Jessica. Figure it out." When Amber made the cheerleading squad's alternate list in 9th grade, my parents attended every game. That same year, when I won the regional science fair, neither could make it because Amber had a cold and needed attention. The summer before my senior year, I was accepted to a prestigious journalism camp at Northwestern University. The program offered scholarships, but not enough to cover all expenses. I needed $500 more. "We just can't swing it this year," my father explained. "We're saving for your college anyway." 2 weeks later, they bought Amber a used car for her 16th birthday, a necessity that cost $4,000. I worked throughout high school, babysitting, lifeguarding, stocking shelves at the local grocery store, saving every penny for college. My parents had started college funds for both of us, but by the time I graduated high school, I learned mine had been significantly depleted to cover Amber's private math tutor, her dance classes, and braces my insurance wouldn't fully cover. Despite this, I secured a partial scholarship to the University of Illinois at Chicago. I worked multiple jobs throughout college, waiting tables, tutoring, taking overnight shifts at a 24-hour copy center. I graduated with a business degree and only $15,000 in student loans, an accomplishment I was proud of. Meanwhile, Amber attended Pennsylvania State University on our parents' dime, changing her major 3 times in 2 years. After college, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Chicago. Over 5 years, I worked my way up to senior marketing coordinator with a decent salary. I found an affordable apartment in Lincoln Park with a roommate, Rachel Martinez, who eventually became one of my closest friends. I built a life for myself, separate from my family's dynamics. I started dating Michael Chen after meeting at a friend's wedding. He was kind, ambitious, and understanding, a software developer with his own apartment in Wicker Park. After a year together, things were getting serious. We had talked about moving in together soon. For the first time, I felt truly stable and independent. I had friends who respected me, a boyfriend who treated me as an equal, and colleagues who valued my contributions. My relationship with my family had settled into a manageable routine, monthly phone calls with my mother, occasional texts with Amber, and holiday visits home. The distance had made things easier, and I had started to heal from the inequality of my childhood. I thought I had escaped the pattern of being the family fixer. Then came the call that would change everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early April. I was preparing for a client presentation when my phone lit up with my father's name. Dad rarely called during work hours, so I stepped away from my desk to answer. "Jessica, we need to talk about your sister," he said, skipping any greeting. My stomach immediately tightened. Those words had never preceded good news. "What happened?" I asked, already dreading the answer. My father sighed heavily before launching into Amber's latest crisis. She had dropped out of college during her final semester, despite our parents paying her full tuition. She had been lying to them for months about attending classes. "But that's not the worst part," my father continued. "She has $45,000 in credit card debt." I nearly dropped my phone. 45,000. How is that even possible? My father explained that Amber had opened multiple credit cards, maxed them all out, and had been making minimum payments until she lost her retail job 2 months ago. Her car had been repossessed last week, which was how my parents discovered the extent of her financial trouble. "She's moving back home next week," he said. "But we need to figure out how to handle this debt." I made sympathetic noises while thinking this was unfortunate, but not my problem. Then my father dropped the bomb. "Your mother and I have been talking, and we think you should help pay off some of Amber's debt." I was so shocked I couldn't speak for several seconds. "You want me to what?" "You're doing well in Chicago, Jessica. You have a good job, no kids, minimal student loans. Your sister is really struggling right now." "Dad, I worked for everything I have," I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to remain calm. "I'm not responsible for Amber's choices." "We're not asking you to pay all of it," he replied, as if that were reasonable. "Just help out with 15,000 or so. We're family, Jessica. This is what families do." "Did Amber ask for my help?" I questioned, already knowing the answer. "Well, no. She's very upset about everything. But your mother and I think. You and Mom think I should bail out Amber." Again. The pattern was so familiar it was almost comical. "Almost." My father's voice hardened. "I didn't realize helping your sister was such an imposition. She's going through a difficult time." "And what about my difficult times, Dad? Who helped me through those?" "You've always been independent, Jessica. You've never needed the kind of support Amber does." I wasn't independent by choice. I'd been forced into self-reliance while my parents poured their resources into my sister. "I need to think about this," I finally said, knowing I couldn't have a rational conversation while so angry. "Don't think too long," my father replied. "These debts are accruing interest every day." After hanging up, I sat in the stairwell of my office building, shaking with anger. My presentation forgotten, I called Rachel and asked if she could meet for drinks after work. I needed to vent to someone who knew my family history. That evening at our favorite bar, I recounted the conversation to Rachel, who was appropriately outraged on my behalf. "They can't be serious," she said, shaking her head. "You're not responsible for your sister's debt. That's insane." My father seemed to think it was perfectly reasonable, I replied, still stunned by the request. "What does Michael say about all this?" Michael met us at the bar after I texted him about the situation. His response was measured but firm. "Jessica, you need to establish clear boundaries with your family," he said. "If you agree to this, you're telling them it's okay to keep taking advantage of you. I knew he was right, but the thought of refusing my parents' request filled me with anxiety. What if they don't speak to me again? What if they think I'm selfish? Do you really want a relationship that's conditional on you being their financial backup plan? Michael asked gently. I didn't have an answer. Despite years of therapy addressing my family issues, the deeply ingrained fear of disappointing my parents still held power over me. I told them I needed time to consider my options, but deep down, I already knew this request crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The following evening, my mother called. Unlike my father's directness, my mother preferred emotional manipulation. Jessica, honey, she began, her voice already wavering. I know your father can be blunt sometimes. I wanted to check in and see how you're doing with everything. I'm processing it, Mom, I replied cautiously. We're just so worried about Amber. She's been crying every night. She feels like she's ruined her life. My mother sniffled, clearly crying herself. Your father and I had to refinance the house to help her with some of the debt. The guilt trip was expertly deployed, but this new information startled me. You refinanced the house? Mom, that's serious. We didn't have a choice. We couldn't let her credit be ruined forever. I bit back the obvious response. That they were enabling Amber rather than helping her face consequences. Instead, I asked, have you and Dad talked to Amber about getting financial counseling? Or maybe a debt consolidation plan? Oh, you know your sister. She's too fragile for that kind of pressure right now. Too fragile. The phrase that had excused Amber's behavior our entire lives. I'll come home this weekend, I finally said. We should talk about this in person. I arrived at my parents' house that Friday evening, dreading the conversation ahead. The moment I walked in, I sensed the tension. My mother hugged me too tightly, my father barely made eye contact, and Amber was nowhere to be seen. She's resting, my mother explained when I asked about my sister's absence. This has all been very traumatic for her. Dinner was a strained affair. My father talked about golf while my mother repeatedly filled my wine glass, as if alcohol might make me more amenable to their request. Finally, as my mother served dessert, Amber made her entrance. My sister had always been pretty in a way I wasn't, blonde like our mother, petite, with delicate features that made people want to protect her. Now, at 25, she looked tired and thinner than usual, but she was wearing expensive designer jeans and carrying a handbag I recognized as costing at least $1,000. Hi, Jess, she said quietly, sliding into her chair. Thanks for coming. Of course, I replied, eyeing her handbag. Nice purse. My mother shot me a warning look. Jessica, please. What? I'm just admiring Amber's taste. Amber shifted uncomfortably. It was a gift. From who? I pressed. An ex-boyfriend, she mumbled. The conversation deteriorated from there. I asked questions about Amber's spending habits, the jobs she'd lost, her plan for moving forward. With each question, my parents grew more defensive on Amber's behalf. Why are you interrogating your sister? My father finally snapped. She's already feeling terrible. I'm trying to understand the situation before I commit $15,000 to it, I replied evenly. The argument that followed was ugly. I learned that much of Amber's debt came from shopping sprees, vacations with friends, and expensive gifts for boyfriends. She had used her credit cards for rent after losing jobs, but had also bought a MacBook Pro, designer clothes, and even a Peloton bike she needed for her mental health. When I suggested Amber sell some of these items to pay down her debt, my father exploded. You've always been selfish, Jessica. Always counting pennies, always keeping score. Richard, my mother interjected, but her tone was pleading rather than reproachful. "No, Karen, she needs to hear this," my father continued. "Your sister made mistakes, yes. But you're sitting there in your high and mighty judgment like you've never needed help." "I have needed help," I said, my voice shaking. "Many times. But I've never gotten it from this family." Amber began to cry. My mother rushed to comfort her, and my father looked at me with disgust. "If this is how you're going to behave, maybe you should go back to Chicago," he said. I stood up, my chair scraping across the floor. Maybe I should. That night, I stayed with my old high school friend Melissa Brooks instead of at my parents' house. Over wine in her kitchen, I recounted the evening's events. "I love your family, Jess, but they've always treated you differently," Melissa said. "Remember when Amber wrecked your dad's car senior year, and somehow it was because you were setting a bad example by staying out late studying at the library?" I laughed bitterly at the memory. God, I'd almost forgotten about that. "Have you thought about just saying no?" Melissa asked. "What's the worst that could happen?" "They'd be furious. They'd say I abandoned the family." "And how would that be different from how they treat you now?" Her question haunted me on the flight back to Chicago. I returned to my apartment feeling betrayed and unappreciated, questioning the entire foundation of my family relationships. Michael came over that evening, and I broke down crying in his arms. "I don't know what to do," I sobbed. "I can't afford to give them that money, and even if I could, it would just continue this pattern forever." "Then don't," Michael said simply. "You can love your family without being their financial safety net." But as I would soon discover, the worst betrayal was yet to come. 2 weeks after my disastrous visit home, I was preparing for a client meeting when my doorbell rang at 7:30 a.m. Assuming it was a package delivery, I was shocked to find Amber standing in the hallway with 2 large suitcases. "Surprise," she said with forced cheerfulness. "Can I come in?" Stunned, I stepped aside. "What are you doing here, Amber?" "Mom and Dad thought it would be good if I stayed with you for a while," she explained, rolling her suitcases into my living room. "Just until I get back on my feet." I hadn't agreed to this. No one had even asked me. "And how long is the while exactly?" Amber shrugged. "Not long. A few weeks, maybe a month or 2. "A month or 2. With my sister, who had never held a job for more than 6 months, who had $45,000 in credit card debt, who had always been bailed out of every consequence. "I have a roommate," I said weakly. "Rachel might not be okay with this." Mom said Rachel's moving out next month anyway to live with her boyfriend. "I can sleep on the couch until then and take her room after." I stared at my sister, amazed by the entitlement. My mother had been pumping Rachel for information during our last holiday visit, but I never imagined she'd use it like this. "Amber, you can't just show up and expect to move in." Her face fell into familiar lines of hurt. "I thought you'd be happy to see me. To help me." Against my better judgment and every warning sign, I agreed to let Amber stay temporarily. I established ground rules. She would look for a job immediately, contribute to groceries and utilities, and respect my space and belongings. Amber readily agreed to everything. Within a week, all rules were broken. Amber slept until noon, left dishes in the sink, and borrowed my clothes without asking. Her job search consisted of half-heartedly scrolling through listings while watching Netflix. When I asked about interviews, there was always an excuse. The position wasn't right, the company seemed toxic, the commute was too long. Rachel was furious about the situation, but tried to be understanding. "It's only temporary," I assured her, not entirely believing it myself. Michael was less diplomatic. After Amber interrupted our dinner date by calling with an emergency, she'd locked herself out and demanded I come home immediately. He voiced his concerns. "Jessica, your sister is taking advantage of you," he said as we drove back to my apartment. "She's not even trying to get back on her feet." I knew he was right, but I felt trapped. Kicking Amber out would mean another explosive confrontation with my parents. I was still trying to find a middle ground when the final betrayal occurred. 3 weeks into Amber's stay, I collected the mail and found an envelope addressed to me from Capital One. I hadn't applied for a new credit card, so I opened it immediately. Inside was a rejection letter for a credit card application in my name, citing insufficient credit history. Confused, I examined the application details. The card had been applied for using my personal information, but with a slightly different email address, jessicaw@gmail.com instead of my actual jessicawilson@gmail.com. I confronted Amber as soon as she woke up. "Did you apply for a credit card in my name?" She blinked innocently. "What? No. Why would I do that?" I showed her the letter. Her denial crumbled quickly. "Okay, but it's not what you think. I just needed a card to help me get started. You wouldn't even notice the payments. This is identity theft, Amber. It's a crime." "God, you're so dramatic," she rolled her eyes. "It's not like they approved it anyway." I was speechless. My own sister had tried to steal my identity after I'd taken her in. I called my parents, certain they would finally see the gravity of the situation. I was wrong. "Jessica, you're overreacting," my father said after I explained what happened. "Amber made a mistake, but she was desperate." "A mistake? Dad, she committed fraud." "She's your sister, for heaven's sake. She wasn't trying to hurt you. She was trying to open a credit card in my name without my knowledge or permission. How is that not hurting me?" My mother got on the line. "Honey, Amber needs support right now, not accusations. She's trying to rebuild her life by destroying mine." My father took the phone back. "That's enough, Jessica. Either help your sister get back on her feet, or you're not part of this family. It's that simple." The ultimatum hung in the air. All my life, I'd feared this moment, being cast out of the family for failing to comply with their demands. Now that it was happening, I felt strangely calm. "I need to go," I said and hung up. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. I called in sick to work the next day, something I rarely did, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My father's ultimatum replayed in my mind: "Help Amber, or you're not part of the family." For the first time, I allowed myself to consider what walking away might actually look like. What if I wasn't part of this family anymore? What would I lose? What might I gain? I called Michael and asked if he could come over. When he arrived, I told him everything: the credit card application, my parents' reaction, the ultimatum. "I'm so sorry, Jess," he said, holding me close. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Michael chose his next words carefully. "I think you need to consider that your family might be toxic for you. Sometimes love means creating distance from people who hurt you, even if they are family. You think I should cut them off?" The idea both terrified and relieved me. "I think you need boundaries that they're not willing to respect. Maybe distance is the only way to create those boundaries." That afternoon, I called Dr. Sarah Thompson, the therapist I'd been seeing on and off since moving to Chicago. She agreed to see me for an emergency session that evening. "Jessica, we've talked about your family dynamics many times," Dr. Thompson said after I recounted recent events. "What's happening now is an escalation of the same pattern we've identified. But cutting off my family, that's extreme, isn't it? Let's reframe this. You're not cutting them off, you're protecting yourself from ongoing harm. There's a difference. My father literally said I wouldn't be part of the family if I didn't help Amber. And what does being part of the family mean in this context? It seems to mean accepting mistreatment and financial exploitation. When she put it that way, the decision became clearer. We spent the session exploring my codependent relationship with my family and how distance might be necessary for my own health and growth. What about disappearing? I asked hesitantly. Just starting over somewhere else. Instead of dismissing the idea, Dr. Thompson considered it thoughtfully. In some situations, when patterns are deeply entrenched and other parties refuse to change, creating a complete break can be healing. It would be difficult, but not impossible. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a life completely separate from my family's dysfunction. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Over the next few days, I researched job opportunities in other cities. Seattle caught my attention, far from Pennsylvania, growing tech scene, beautiful surroundings. Several marketing firms were hiring, and some positions were even remote. I calculated what savings I had available, and what I would need to start over. Michael supported my exploration, but worried about the extreme nature of disappearing. Couldn't you just move and tell them you're not available to help financially? You don't understand. They would never stop. There would always be another crisis, another guilt trip, another demand. As long as they can reach me, this will continue. The final push came when I returned home early from work and found Amber going through my personal files. She claimed she was looking for stamps, but I discovered she had been photographing my financial documents with her phone. "What is wrong with you?" I shouted, grabbing her phone. "Give that back," she yelled, lunging for the device. "Why?" "So you can steal more of my information. Commit more fraud. You're such a bitch." Amber screamed, shoving me hard. "You've always had it easy. Everything always works out for perfect Jessica." As I stumbled backward, something broke inside me. The careful restraint I'd maintained my entire life shattered. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my apartment now." "Fine," Amber spat. "I'll tell Mom and Dad how you assaulted me. How you pushed me and grabbed my phone. See how they like their perfect daughter then." In that moment, I knew I was making the right decision. There was no fixing this relationship, no healthy way forward. The only path was out. The next morning, I called in sick again and began methodical planning. If I was going to disappear, I needed to be strategic. I couldn't leave loose ends that would allow my family to track me down, or continue to damage my financial standing. First, I secured my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, passport, and placed them in a lockbox at a new bank where I opened an account my family didn't know about. I withdrew a significant amount of cash from my existing accounts, leaving enough to avoid suspicion, but ensuring I had funds that couldn't be traced. I reached out to contacts in Seattle, using a new email address not connected to my name. Within days, I had 2 promising remote job interviews scheduled. I researched apartments in Seattle's Fremont district, finding a small but affordable studio available for immediate occupancy. I put down a deposit using my new bank account. My next step was addressing the identity theft attempt. I consulted with a lawyer who specialized in identity theft cases, explaining my sister's actions and my fear that she might try again. "You should file a police report," the lawyer advised. "Even if you don't press charges, having documentation will protect you if she tries to open accounts in your name in the future." Filing the report was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. The officer took my statement matter-of-factly, but I felt physically ill providing evidence against my own sister. Still, I knew it was necessary. Following the lawyer's advice, I placed a freeze on my credit, making it impossible for anyone to open new accounts in my name. I set up fraud alerts and began the process of changing my phone number and email addresses. The emotional preparation was even more difficult than the logistical planning. I continued sessions with Dr. Thompson, processing the grief of leaving my family behind. What you're experiencing is ambiguous loss, she explained. Your family is still alive, but you're mourning the relationship you wished you had with them. I filled journal after journal with my thoughts, trying to make sense of my decision. Some days I felt strong and certain, other days I questioned everything. Was I overreacting? Would I regret this forever? Was there another way? Telling my Chicago friends goodbye without revealing my full plan was painful. I told them I was considering a move to Seattle, but kept the timing and circumstances vague. Only Rachel knew most of the truth, as she had witnessed Amber's behavior firsthand. I'll miss you like crazy, she said, hugging me tight. But I get it. I really do. The most difficult conversation was with Michael. We met at the lakefront, our favorite walking spot. I've accepted a job in Seattle, I told him after we'd walked in silence for several minutes. When do you start? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Soon. Very soon. Michael stopped walking and turned to face me. And you weren't going to tell me until you were gone, were you? I couldn't meet his eyes. I thought it would be easier. Easier for who, Jess? Not for me. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I love you. Did you think I wouldn't want to be part of your new life? You have a career here, friends, an apartment. I can't ask you to give that up. You didn't ask. You didn't give me any choice at all. We sat on a bench overlooking the water, discussing possibilities. Michael offered to come with me, to try long distance, to visit regularly. I was terrified of bringing any connection to my past into my new life, afraid my family would use it to find me. I need a clean break, I finally admitted. At least for now. I need to figure out who I am without all of this weighing me down. And where does that leave us? Michael asked, pain evident in his voice. I don't know, I answered honestly. But if we're meant to find our way back to each other, we will. Once I'm settled, once I feel safe. It wasn't the answer either of us wanted, but it was the truth. We agreed to a temporary goodbye with the promise to reconnect once I was established in Seattle. My last day at work was bittersweet. I had given my notice, citing a family emergency requiring relocation. My colleagues threw a small goodbye party, complete with a card everyone had signed and a gift certificate to a popular Seattle coffee chain. You'll be missed, Jessica, my manager said. Don't be a stranger. I smiled and promised to keep in touch, knowing I would have to break that promise along with so many others. The night before my departure, I walked through my half-packed apartment one last time. Rachel was staying with her boyfriend, giving me space for final preparations. Most of my belongings were being donated or left behind. I was taking only what would fit in my car. I sat at my kitchen table and wrote a letter I knew I might never send. Dear Mom, Dad, and Amber, asterisk. By the time you realize I'm gone, I'll be far away. I'm sorry it's come to this, but I can't continue in a relationship that causes me so much pain. 4 years, I've tried to be the daughter and sister you wanted, but it's never been enough. Asterisk. I need to create a life where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I don't know if we'll ever speak again. That depends on many things, including whether you can respect the boundaries I've never been allowed to set. Asterisk. I do love you, even now. But I've finally learned to love myself more. Jessica asterisk. I folded the letter and placed it in my journal, then finished packing the last of my chosen belongings. Tomorrow would be the first day of my new life. I woke before dawn on June 1st, my departure day. Amber was still asleep on my couch, oblivious to my plans. I moved silently through the apartment, loading the last few bags into my car. I had arranged for a local charity to pick up my furniture the following week, leaving a check for Rachel to handle the details. On the kitchen table, I left 3 envelopes, one for Amber containing a note asking her to be out of the apartment by the end of the week, with her belongings packed by the door, one for Rachel with a proper goodbye and thanks for her friendship, and one for my landlord explaining my early termination of the lease, with compensation, as required by our contract. I took one last look around the apartment that had been my home for 3 years, feeling a strange mix of grief and liberation. Then I slipped out the door before Amber could wake up and try to stop me. The journey across the country was both physical and emotional. I drove rather than flew, wanting to avoid creating flight records that could be traced. I paid cash at small motels along the route, using a different name at each one. During the long hours on the road, I alternated between exhilarating freedom and crushing doubt. Outside Rapid City, South Dakota, I pulled over at a rest stop and had my first full-blown panic attack. What was I doing? Was I throwing away my entire life over a family disagreement? Was I being melodramatic? I called Dr. Thompson from a gas station payphone, gasping through tears. "Jessica, listen to me," she said calmly. "What you're experiencing is normal. Big changes, even positive ones, create stress. That doesn't mean you're making a mistake." "But what if I am?" I whispered. "Then you'll adjust your course. This isn't irreversible. You're creating distance you need right now. That can change if and when you're ready." Her words steadied me enough to continue. 4 days after leaving Chicago, I arrived in Seattle, exhausted but determined. My new apartment was tiny, just a studio with a kitchenette and bathroom, but it was mine alone. The building was secure, requiring key fob access, and I'd rented it under my new bank account with no connection to my previous addresses. I spent that first night on an air mattress, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my new neighborhood. The next morning, I began setting up my new life. I purchased basic furniture, set up utilities, and familiarized myself with the area. I started my remote marketing job the following Monday, grateful for work that wouldn't require me to build an in-person professional network right away. The first week was the hardest. Every time my phone rang with an unknown number, my heart raced, thinking my family had somehow tracked me down. I checked over my shoulder constantly, half expecting to see my father's disapproving face, or my mother's hurt expression. I jumped at every knock on my door. Seattle itself was both beautiful and intimidating. The mountains visible in the distance, the water surrounding the city, the coffee shops on every corner, everything was new and strange. I forced myself to explore my neighborhood each day, finding comfort in establishing small routines: morning coffee at the corner cafe, evening walks along the canal, weekend trips to the local farmers market. Slowly, tentatively, I began to build a life. I joined a book club that met at a nearby library. I found a yoga studio within walking distance of my apartment. I discovered a favorite grocery store, a go-to takeout place, a quiet spot by the water where I could think. Meanwhile, my phone filled with increasingly frantic messages from my family. At first, I listened to them without responding, needing to know they were okay while maintaining my distance. My mother's tearful pleas gave way to my father's angry demands and finally to Amber's accusations that I had abandoned the family when they needed me most. I learned from Rachel that my parents had filed a missing person report. The police had visited my Chicago apartment and confirmed I had left voluntarily, closing the case. My family didn't accept this, convinced something terrible must have happened to make me leave without warning. After 6 weeks of silence, I sent a brief text message to my mother's phone: "I'm safe. I need space. Please respect that." I blocked their numbers immediately afterward, not ready for any response. As the weeks turned to months, the raw pain of separation began to dull. I made a few acquaintances at yoga class, including Diana Reynolds, my 62-year-old landlady, who also happened to attend the same studio. She invited me to a neighborhood potluck where I met more people, including Ethan Parker, a 32-year-old graphic designer who worked remotely like me. "Moving across the country alone takes guts," Ethan commented when I mentioned I was new to Seattle. "What brought you here?" "A fresh start," I replied, the answer becoming more comfortable with each telling. I was learning that most people didn't pry if you didn't invite them to. By December, 6 months into my new life, I had established a comfortable routine. My apartment felt like home, decorated simply but warmly. I had casual friendships with several neighbors and classmates from yoga. My work performance had earned me additional responsibilities and a small raise. For the first time in my life, I was defining myself by my own standards rather than my family's expectations. I also felt ready to reconnect with Michael. I sent him an email from a new address, explaining where I was and asking if he wanted to visit. His response came within hours: "I've missed you every day. Just tell me when." Michael flew to Seattle the following weekend. Seeing him walk through the airport terminal, I felt a rush of emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. We embraced for a long time, neither wanting to let go. "Your hair is different," he said, touching the shorter cut I'd adopted. "New city, new me," I replied with a small smile. We spent the weekend exploring Seattle together, talking about everything that had happened since I left. Michael had been promoted at his company and was now managing a development team. He had missed me terribly, but understood why I needed to leave. "I'm proud of you, Jess," he said as we walked along Alki Beach. "I know how hard this has been. We're rebuilding slowly," I explained. "Taking it one day at a time, seeing where it leads." He didn't push for definitions or commitments, and I was grateful. We were finding our way back to each other at our own pace. As the new year began, I felt strong enough to check in with Melissa, my friend from Pennsylvania. She provided the first real update on my family. "Your disappearance was a wake-up call," she told me during our video chat. "Your parents were devastated, especially after the police confirmed you weren't in danger. They've had to face some hard truths." According to Melissa, after I left, Amber had continued her irresponsible behavior until my father had a minor heart attack from the stress. The health scare had forced both my parents to reevaluate their priorities and approach to Amber. "She's actually working now," Melissa said. "A real job, full-time. Your parents made her get financial counseling too. They're not bailing her out anymore." "And how are my parents?" I asked, surprised by how much I still cared. "Your dad's recovered well physically. They are both different. Subdued. I think they realize they drove you away." The news left me with mixed emotions. I was glad my family was making positive changes, but sad it took such drastic measures to prompt them. I wasn't ready to reconnect, but for the first time, I could imagine a future where some form of relationship might be possible. As my one-year anniversary in Seattle approached, I reflected on how far I'd come. My tiny studio had given way to a one-bedroom apartment with a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. My position at work had evolved into a leadership role with more creativity and responsibility. I had developed genuine friendships with several people, including my neighbor Diana and my colleague Ethan. My relationship with Michael had grown stronger through the distance. We took turns visiting each other monthly, and he was considering a transfer to his company's Seattle office. We had discussed moving in together once he relocated, taking the next step in our relationship at a pace that felt right for both of us. My healing journey continued with a new therapist in Seattle, who helped me work through the lingering guilt and grief about my family. Through therapy, I came to understand that disappearing had been necessary for my mental health at that time, even if it wasn't a permanent solution. You created the space you needed to heal, my therapist explained. Now you can decide what kind of relationship you want with your family moving forward, if any. I had maintained minimal contact with Rachel and Melissa, my connections to my past life. Through them, I continued to receive occasional updates about my family. My father had indeed made lifestyle changes after his heart attack. My mother had joined a support group for parents, seemingly recognizing her enabling behavior. Most surprisingly, Amber had maintained steady employment for almost a year, and was slowly paying off her debts. After much thought and discussion with both Michael and my therapist, I decided to write a letter to my parents. Not the emotional letter I'd drafted the night before leaving, but a thoughtful explanation of why I had left and what would need to change for any relationship to be possible in the future. Dear Mom and Dad, *. It's been a year since I left Chicago. I want you to know that I'm safe and well. I've built a new life that brings me peace and fulfillment. I left because I could no longer be part of a family dynamic where I was valued only for what I could provide: emotional support, financial assistance, or solutions to problems I didn't create. For years, I tried to earn your approval by being responsible, reliable, and successful. Yet no achievement was ever enough to grant me the same care and consideration you freely gave Amber. The final straw was not just being asked to pay Amber's debts, but the realization that my refusal would cost me my place in the family. When Amber attempted to commit fraud using my identity and you defended her actions, I understood that my well-being would always be sacrificed for hers. I'm not writing to place blame or reopen old wounds. I'm writing because I've reached a place where I can consider having some form of relationship with you, but only with clear boundaries. 1. I will not provide financial support to either you or Amber under any circumstances. 2. I will not tolerate any attempt to manipulate me through guilt or obligation. 3. I will only engage in communication that is respectful and considerate of my feelings. 4. I will immediately end any conversation that violates these boundaries. If you can accept these terms, we can begin with occasional phone calls and see where that leads. If not, I wish you well, but I will continue my life separately from the family. This letter is not an invitation to find me. I will contact you if and when I'm ready for direct communication. Jessica*. I mailed the letter to my parents' home address, using a Seattle business as the return address. Then I waited, not knowing if or how they would respond. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived at my workplace. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. My father's handwriting was instantly recognizable, though less certain than I remembered. He acknowledged receiving my letter and expressed both regret and confusion over my disappearance. He admitted that my leaving had forced them to confront painful truths about their parenting and the unhealthy family dynamic they had created. Your mother and I have spent this year examining our actions and trying to understand where we went wrong. It was easier to enable Amber than to help her grow. It was easier to depend on your strength than to acknowledge your pain. We failed you both, in different ways. Asterisk. He wrote that Amber was continuing to work on her financial responsibility, though she still struggled sometimes. My mother was seeing a therapist to address her enabling behaviors. My father had retired after his heart scare, reassessing his priorities. We miss you every day, Jessica. We would very much like to have some relationship with you, on whatever terms you can accept. Your boundaries are clear, and we will respect them. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope for a chance to do better. Asterisk. The letter included their new email addresses and phone numbers, but no pressure to use them. The ball was in my court. I waited another month before sending an email to my mother. It was brief, just a few lines asking how they were doing and sharing that I was well. Her response came quickly, warm but careful, respecting the boundaries I had established. She didn't ask where I was living or working, didn't mention financial issues or Amber's situation unless I inquired specifically. Over the next few weeks, we exchanged occasional emails. My father joined the correspondence, his messages shorter but sincere. They were trying, I could tell, to relate to me as an adult with her own life rather than as the family problem solver. In February, almost a year after my letter, I agreed to a phone call. I was nervous, pacing my apartment as the appointed time approached. Michael offered to stay with me for support, but I decided this first conversation should be private. Jessica. My mother's voice was tentative when I answered, as if she feared I might hang up. Hi, Mom, I replied, surprised by the emotion that welled up at the sound of her voice. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with careful small talk and long pauses. Gradually, we found a rhythm, sharing small details about our lives without venturing into difficult territory. My father joined briefly, his gruff voice softened with what sounded like unshed tears. We're proud of you, he said simply before passing the phone back to my mother. That first call lasted only 15 minutes, but it was a beginning. More calls followed, each a little easier than the last. I maintained my boundaries firmly but kindly, ending one conversation when my mother began to hint at Amber's financial struggles. They didn't push after that. By April, 1 year after my departure, Michael had transferred to Seattle, and we had moved in together. I felt secure enough in my new life to consider an in-person meeting with my parents. We agreed to meet in Denver, neutral territory for all of us. The reunion was emotional and imperfect. There were tears, awkward hugs, and moments of tension when old patterns threatened to emerge. But there was also genuine effort on all sides to create something new and healthier. You look happy, my mother said as we parted at the airport. That's all I've ever wanted for you. I am happy, I replied, realizing the truth of it as I spoke. I've found my way. My relationship with my family continues to evolve. We speak monthly, exchange holiday and birthday cards, and plan occasional visits. Amber and I have had limited contact, both recognizing the need for space in our relationship. She sent me an apology letter that seemed genuine, though I'm still cautious about fully trusting her again. The journey of healing isn't over, and perhaps it never will be. Family wounds run deep, and old patterns can resurface in moments of stress. But I've learned that disappearing wasn't just an escape. It was an act of self-preservation that allowed me to build a life on my own terms. Sometimes walking away is the only way to save yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and eventually for others, is to disappear until you're strong enough to return on your own terms. If my story resonates with you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to preserve your mental health? Did you eventually reconnect, or was the separation permanent? Remember to subscribe for more stories of healing and transformation, and like this video if it touched you in some way. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey, and may you find the strength to set the boundaries you need in your own life.